BYU basketball loses another head scratcher last week. We're talking about it coming up. Plus, Tony Padilla, does he have actual beef with BYU? And finally, the Athlon early preseason football rankings are out. Where does BYU stand, and what do we think about it? That's all coming up on the Loyal Cougars Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Active Podcast Studio. This is the Loyal Cougars Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, joined again today by my favorite Polynesian, Hema Heimuli. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back.
Last time you joined, you were my favorite Heimuli. Yeah. You're my favorite Polynesian today.
Thank you.
How was your weekend?
Oh, it was good. Pretty chill. Spent some time with the family. Watched the world melt down over TikTok, and then instantly, maybe 12 hours later, go back to normal since TikTok came back.
Honestly, we could have an entire episode. I get that this is a BYU podcast. I could talk the full episode about the whole TikTok ban.
Wild.
/unban. The ban lasted, 10 hours?
Was it a real ban?
And what was the purpose of it? The whole Trump getting involved and, the Zuckerberg, Facebook, Instagram involvement or not involvement. There's just so many conspiracy theories about it. I could talk forever, but we're already losing some listeners, I think, by talking about TikTok. So I also saw that you found some old songs on an old iPod.
Yeah, I found an old iPod video that had just been sitting in a drawer. I bought a replacement battery for it, and I cracked it open, replaced the battery, and it worked, and I fired it up. And it was kind of fun scrolling through and listening to some old songs that, I haven't listened to for maybe 20 years. So that was kind of fun. And I thought it would be fun to just film it and scroll through with, the risk of showing some embarrassing songs that are in there and stuff like that. But it was fun. In fact, my oldest, Hendrix, he's 9. He's been listening to it nonstop around the house on these old corded headphones. So yeah, it's fun.
What I loved about those is that at the time it felt like it could store an infinite amount of songs, and nowadays you just stream it, and so it doesn't really matter about storage per se. But I think people had thousands, if not tens of thousands, of songs on those things.
And the game changing thing too was you lived through the Walkman, right, the Discman or whatever, and every time you went over a bump in your car, it would skip. So not having the skips was the best part of having those.
The challenges of the 90s with CDs. In junior high and high school. All right, let's talk about some BYU because that is what this podcast is about.
Yes, sir.
BYU going 1-1. They split their games last week. This was a week that I thought they needed to win both to really still be in tournament contention, at least bubble contention, right? And they beat Oklahoma State, who I thought of the two games was the most winnable. Granted, Oklahoma State's lost a lot of games. I think Utah. They beat TCU before they beat BYU, and so I think they're kind of on the rise a little bit. I don't think Utah is necessarily a tournament team, but I do think that they are, at least middle of the pack, Big 12 team. I was surprised at how Utah won, and we could talk real quick just about that game because there's, honestly, there's kind of a lot you can take away from that game. But I was surprised that Utah's two best shooters, the Gabe Madsen and Mason Madsen kids, combined to shoot, I think, 2 of 12 from the field, scored a combined 8 points. And if you would have told me that going into the game, I would have said BYU is going to win by 15, 20 points. Because to me, that was the key to the game, was how can you limit the Madsen boys to not shoot the ball well? Yeah. And they didn't. And Utah had a guy, Asar, who just could not, BYU just had no answer for underneath, and that's how they ended up pulling away.
I think that is the most surprising part. The Utah, I think it is surprising, and then again, it's not. The fact that it's a rivalry game, the fact that it was back and forth, I didn't think BYU had it in the bag per se, going into Salt Lake to play. But what did surprise me was the rest of the team rallying, Asar especially, finding ways to make buckets where the Madsen brothers didn't. And I think Utah just kind of, their playbook to play BYU was just what everyone else is figuring out, is that if you play physical against BYU, you'll be able to get points in the paint. And what's worse is BYU can't shoot free throws for crap. And so just knowing that, you're just like, okay, we'll play physical. If they get to the line, great, because they're not going to make him. And that's kind of what bore out at the end of the game.
Yeah. And honestly, going into this season, in fact, I would say before conference play, we quickly realized that this BYU team couldn't shoot free throws very well. And I think everyone kind of said BYU is going to drop a couple games, if not more than a couple games, due to free throws. And this is one of those, right? This is a free throw casualty game. Yeah. Now, I will say Utah on the other side, if they had lost the game, they could have also pointed to free throws. Mm-hmm. And so, I think Utah basically gave BYU as many opportunities as they could to win the game, and BYU just couldn't pull it out due to free throws. But you hit the nail on the head. I think offensively, BYU continues to struggle. And it's really hard to point to one thing, right?
Yeah.
There's so many things going on with this offense. We've talked about Yegor Demon a lot, and he's 18 and he's going to make 18-year-old mistakes. Cannon Catchings hasn't been who we wanted him to be, but again, he's 18. I think we could talk about this. First of all, I want to start with a couple of things that are being said by fans, because this podcast is where we talk about what fans are talking about. And so a couple things. Arkea on Cougar Board, he said, we miss Jax more than we knew we would, talking about Jackson Robinson. Do you agree with that?
I'm going to say no. I mean, Jackson he's a great player. Obviously, he won 6th Man of the Year, right? But he was also a volume shooter. And there's not a lot of room on this roster to have a volume shooter.
Yeah.
Whereas Mark Pope, when Jackson was on the floor, we just fed Jackson the ball. You could argue that Canyon's kind of like that, or Coach Young is supposed to use Cannon that way to be kind of a volume shooter. But I think that's just a casualty of the way the roster was constructed last year under Mark Pope.
Yeah.
That's not to say that Jackson is not a great player. He is. I would love to have him on the team now.
Absolutely.
But I don't think we miss him necessarily. In fact, if Cannon was hitting his shots, we probably wouldn't feel that way.
Yeah. I tend to agree. I actually thought Jackson, even though he was BYU's leading scorer last year, he did attempt more than 10 shots a game. The next highest attempt was Spencer Johnson at 8.7. So Jackson was very much a high volume shooter. He was a high scorer. But the other thing I thought about Jackson was that it didn't seem like, especially during conference play, it didn't seem like he really fit within the system. Now, granted, I think that's can be fine. If you have a guy like Donovan Mitchell, I think for the Jazz was kind of a guy like that. Now, granted, Quinn had a much robust system, and so he could fit guys like Donovan into the system. But BYU was very much a kick and drive, a feed Foose, and if he can score, great. If not, kick it back out. He set a lot of high ball screens.
Yeah.
When Jackson got the ball, it was very much isolation basketball, and so I don't think they missed that per se. Right? They needed a guy. They needed somebody that can more fit the system, and I think Cannon was supposed to be that guy, like you said. And so I don't think they miss Jackson as much. Now, 14 points a game, it's nothing to scoff at. I think they need to somehow find a way to replace that production. But I don't think Jackson Robinson as a person, as a player, was someone that they missed that much. Now, someone else on Cougar Board brought up a good point. BYU 80 said, I believe we miss Spencer Johnson more. His calm presence, rebounding, passing, and overall decision-making. And I actually tend to agree with that. And it's funny because, we've talked about Jackson before. We've talked about Khalifa before. And it seems like those are kind of the two guys that I've kind of back of my mind felt like, BYU needed to replace that production. I'll be honest, I completely forgot about Spencer Johnson. And that's probably says more about me than it does about Spencer. But Spencer was a guy that just kind of quietly stuffed stat sheets. And that's the type of player that fits within a system that kind of quietly produces that I think BYU does miss.
I think you're spot on. Spencer Johnson, I didn't forget about him, but I think the beauty of Spencer Johnson is that the way he plays is easy to forget about, him. He's more about the team. And what I mean by is this, I think it was 2 years ago, Spencer Johnson was the point man, and he had a lot of the offense ran through him. And then the last year he was on the team, he was asked to be more of a 2-guard, more of a off-ball guy. and he was still able to get it done. And I think that's the beauty and the uniqueness of Spencer Johnson. And, I think every team in the world would want a Spencer Johnson. But the thing that I think BYU misses most this season, and in relation to Spencer Johnson, is like, who's someone that's like guaranteed 8 buckets a game?
Yeah. Who's
guaranteed can score every single game? And I don't think we have a guy like that right now, except for maybe Richie. He's scoring a lot every game, but other than that,
and I'll say this: it's not even like a guy. It's more of like the system as a whole. There's nothing that's happening in the system to initiate an offense. It's kind of hard to say. It's hard to like pinpoint exactly like what's happening, but you look at like a Yegor who initiates the offense, who tries to initiate the offense. He's got a guy on him. Foose or Cato will come out and set a screen, and the screen does nothing. He either rejects it, or it's it's very much a lateral side to side screen. There's nothing to get Yegor downhill, and I don't know if it's because the screens are being poorly set. If Yegor is just like not waiting for it properly to come, or if he's rejecting it too much. But like, it's not just Yegor too. Like Dallin does, it's nothing. There's nothing within the system that allows the ball handler to get downhill.
Yeah.
And Jackson last year was a guy that could do it without a screen. Like he didn't need a screen. I think Dallin is kind of like that this year, but Dallin doesn't have the ball in his hands that much. I don't think Yegor really can. I think he can get to that point, but he's not a guy that can get downhill without a screen.
Yeah.
And the screens just aren't working, right? I just don't think the system is working to get guys downhill to initiate the offense. And I'm not a coach. I don't know how to do that. Maybe you set rescreens if they go underneath, and or you set screens so the action starts going downhill before the screen is even set. I don't know. There's ways to do it. But
I think you're on to something though, because I talked to Kristen Kozlowski, and she talked about how this team doesn't have enough downhill. And then I talked to Jonathan Tavernari, and he kind of further explained why they're not getting downhill enough. And he says, because Yegor needs more space to work with. We've seen that the space issue, and Kevin Young has said it in a post-game interview, that like the spacing is different from the NBA. It's a lot smaller. Even though the court's the same size, like the space is smaller in college. And I think they're still trying to figure that out. And I think that lends to Yegor like not being able to use screens as efficiently. I noticed that like a lot of the time once we cross midcourt, like our guards get trapped quite a bit, and they have to like fight out of a trap because everyone's going to press us because they know that physicality is the way to beat BYU. So, yeah, I do think it's the system. I think it's just something that people need to expect because, I mean, you get a new head coach, that's kind of a rebuilding year, right? So there's things that BYU needs to get used to, and I think just with all the hype with Kevin Young, we forget that as fans. Like, we're so excited for Yegor. We're so excited for Cannon, all these guys, which is great. We should be excited for them. But we got to remember, like, they still need to play together, and they haven't put it together this year.
Yeah, and I think the guy that's being impacted negatively the most is Dallin Hall. And we've talked about Dallin before. And it's pretty clear, right? Him and Yegor don't work well together. And I don't mean that to say, like, they don't get along.
Not chemistry, like, yeah.
In fact, I want to get into that, too, because I think Dallin is actually like the quintessential teammate, right? I think he could have transferred right after last season, and I think BYU fans were grateful that he didn't. But he could also this year be sulking, right? We've seen players on this team sulk. And granted, like there's been moments where it's probably warranted, but Dallin's a guy. And if you notice this, every timeout, whether he's on the floor or on the bench, every timeout, he is the first, if not one of the first guys on the floor high-fiving their teammates as they're coming off the floor. And I think that's, including Yegor, right? Like, Yegor comes off the floor, he's giving him high fives. And could that be just like lip service or for show? Maybe, but I don't think Dallin's that type of person. I remember Dallin in high school was very much the same type of player.
Yes.
In fact, if you remember, Dallin was a guy that Donovan Mitchell called out on Twitter, specifically on Twitter, like this guy, this number, whatever. I don't remember what number he was in high school. Yeah. Like he's going to be a baller. Like he's a baller. And I think after that, Dallin got a picture with Donovan. He went on his mission. I think people kind of forgot about it. But Dallon's always been that type of player. And I think that's huge. And again, just a quote from Cougar Board, KYU. And this is after the Oklahoma State game. He said, best thing I saw tonight was Hall being truly happy for Demon when he was shaking off the rust. We need good chemistry with the tough coaching decisions that are and will continue to happen. So I think despite everything that Dallon's gone through, the fact that he is probably one of the biggest cheerleaders for Yegor and Yegor's progression says a lot about him.
I think Dallon Hall is also the perfect, thank God he stayed, because he's the perfect leader that a guy like Yegor needs, a young person like Yegor needs, because, Dallon, when he's on the court, he makes the right choice, I would say 90% of the time, whether it's a pass or whatever. He knows that if he's not scoring, he still has a job to do, right? I think Dallon was 0 for 5 or something. On the night.
He was for 6 or something. Yeah. I think he had 2 free throws and that was it.
But he would still make the right pass. He would still make, the right moves. Whereas, Yegor, because he's young, because, he is talented, if he's not scoring, he looks bad. You can see the body language. He's he just feels like he needs to score. He's frustrated.
Yes.
You see that.
And it's not at him. It's not at his team, or coaches or anything. He's getting the ball enough, right?
Yeah. But he just knows, when he hits a shot, you can see him, whatever. But, Dallon doesn't do that. And it's nice to have Dallon to, hey, you can work through this. I mean, shooters with an off night just got to shoot. And that's the toughest part, right?
Yep, exactly.
And so having a leader like Dallon that's able to guide Yegor, I'm 100% sure that next season, Yegor's going to be a different player. I think he's going to take a step, and I think it's going to be a lot of Dallon's leadership.
This is assuming he comes back, right?
That's true.
Assuming he could. Back. I mean, he's literally he's been pretty adamant about never having said that he's a one and done player. So he could very well come back. All right. Another thing making headlines from the Utah game, and I think kind of inappropriately, is the officials, and specifically one official, Tony Padilla. We're going to get into Tony Padilla and kind of the criticism that he's facing and whether or not we think he deserves that. That's all coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit goaptiv.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787 and mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's goaptiv.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Get home field advantage with Aptiv. Why should you have to choose between style and repping your team? Wooden Grail is bridging the gap between modern fashion and college fandom. Their hats and apparel are made with premium materials like suede and corduroy, featuring bold, unique designs that let you show off your team pride without sacrificing your look. Whether you're at the game or out on the town, Wooden Grail lets you do both. Check them out at woodengrail.com and step up your fan game. Use code CougarBoard for free shipping on any order. Speaking of Wooden Grail, they gave us some hats for our studio just to put on display. These are seriously some of the best. And they're not paying this. We already did our ad, our reader. This is outside of that. I'm going to have a hard time just not bringing this home and wearing it. It's for the studio.
Yeah. But these are, it's just, the designs are so clean. They just look so nice. So yeah.
And for those that aren't watching, on YouTube, because this is going out on podcast platforms as well. One of these hats, it's a quarterback factory hat. So it's got kind of this new style BYU logo with just embroidered quarterback. Ty Detmer, Bosco,
they're all
Steve
embroidered
Young,
all the way around.
Jim McMahon. Their embroidered images are all the way around the hat. It's very nice. You'll have to go to their website and check them out. Okay, so sticking with the BYU Utah game, I think kind of a storyline that came out of the game towards the end was the officiating. And granted, we can get into the officiating. I don't think it's really worth it because, to be completely honest, I don't think the officiating had much to do with it.
No, I don't either.
And I will say this. The only issues that I have, specific plays that I had, was the phantom call on Erickson towards the end of the game where he made one and airballed the second free throw. I thought the contact was initiated by him. I thought the defender, I think it was Dawson Baker, was jumping straight up in the air, and he actually retreated. Very phantom call.
Yeah.
And we'll get into phantom calls in just a second. The second, and this is actually a no call, was the very next play where Baker was driving, put up a floater, and he was, hit pretty hard from behind, bumped pretty hard from behind. That should have been a foul. He should have gotten free throws. It didn't matter though, because the ball went out of bounds, and Trevin Nell was fouled on the inbound play, and he got 2 free throws. Well, 1-1 actually, and missed the front end. And ultimately that's why BYU lost, right? So they still got their free throws out of it. Other than that, I think the officiating of the game was very, very tame and mild, and really not worth talking about.
I think to reconcile like the comments that we're seeing and our opinion, I think it's not necessarily like Tony Padilla, like him having it in for BYU. I think he's just not a good ref overall.
Yes.
Like I don't think he has it in for BYU.
Yeah.
I do think, despite all the calls or no calls, ultimately BYU lost the game.
Yeah.
On free throw shooting specifically.
So Tony Padilla is an official that has gotten a lot of negative notoriety for some of his calls. In fact, I looked his name up, I think, on X, and it showed one of the plays that he called a foul on, and it was this phenomenal dunk. I think it was in the NCAA tournament. I don't even remember who the team was. A phenomenal dunk where a defender went up. He was jumping from inside the cylinder. Okay. And for all intents and purposes, it should have been a no call. If anything, a defensive foul. Called an offensive foul on the dunk. And that went viral. I think a lot of people were like, "This guy stinks," and it was Tony Padilla. Yeah. And then I went and looked at some articles, and there's some like anonymous coaches that are talking about how Tony, they can't stand the phantom calls, and they say like I can understand incorrect calls, or I can understand like block charge or whatever being incorrect. It's the phantom calls that really get them, and we saw a taste of that, like I said, with the Erickson. The foul on Erickson's drive to the basket where he got 2 free throws and airballed 1. So that's what Tony Padilla is kind of capable of and known for. Yeah. That said, this is a tweet that went out after the game, since has been deleted by Booze Cougs, and I think it's been deleted. We'll talk about why. He says, Tony Padilla has officiated 58 games of BYU since 2010. In Padilla officiated games, BYU is 11-47, a 23% win rate, while winning 72% overall during that same time period. It's time to take a closer look at Tony Padilla. And I think if you take that that tweet and don't take it with a grain of salt, then for sure, like Tony Padilla should be almost investigated, right? Like that's pretty egregious to be that much worse when officiating BYU games. But the reality is that's not really his statistics. I went into it a little bit here. I looked at BYU's last 20 games that were officiated by Tony Padilla. They're 12-8. So already that's wrong, right? He said they were 11-47. They were 12-8 in the last 20 games. I didn't go farther back than that. But in Padilla coached games, BYU's had 350 fouls called against them. Opponents have had 357. So, the reality is those numbers, I don't know where Booze Cougs got them from. They're not right.
Right. And I think, especially right after a game, like maybe don't complain so much about the officiating, because, a lot of stats still are being calculated and whatever. And it's a loss that sucks. I understand.
Yeah.
It's a sucky loss. Losing to Utah anytime, any game, anywhere, it sucks. But it's one the Cougs lost. It's not an officiating error or anything like that. It wasn't stolen from us. I'm still excited to be in the Big 12. I think that,
unlike Mark Harlan,
if we'd all just calm down, then kind of see how things shake out. The more interesting narratives should be, what does BYU do next? How do you improve free throw shooting, and what kind of chemistry will lead to a better offense? And that's all stuff that I'm more interested in going forward. I honestly, can I give you a hot take?
Absolutely.
I think we should start thinking about next year. I don't think, okay, before you guys hang me here, I think this team is what the team is going to be, and we need more time to like sort things out. I'm not saying like, I don't know. I'm not trying to be a negative Nancy or anything like that, but it's like this is the softest section of the schedule, and we're having trouble hitting free throws, and we're having trouble against aggressive defenses. The defenses are only going to get more aggressive, like as the season goes on, and you think it's going to be softer in the first round of the NCAA tournament if we get there? No.
Or the conference tournament.
Or the conference tournament.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of answers that need to be found for this BYU team.
Yeah, and I don't know where to start with that, because I actually agree to an extent that it's kind of sad that we're already looking towards next season, but it's like so hard. It's so hard to see AJ DeBanza highlights in high school and be like, man, I kind of wish we were like 12 months from now, like watching him play for BYU.
Dude, any team, it's like you have a window, right? Like any professional team as well. In college, you can argue is becoming more and more professional. You're going to have a window to hit. And that's what tanking is all about, right? Like you try to hit that window in the most efficient way as possible. I'm not saying BYU is going to tank, but I am saying maybe we figure out how to use AJ DeBanza in the future and who's best suited to work with him on the court.
No, I will say tanking in college is not a thing for obvious reasons. Here's something that was said on Cougar Board. Holy cow, the name Chipichawa. It says, maybe my uneducated take, but I could see a bunch of players transferring out after this season. All these highly rated recruits that were promised development are regressing. Catchings has been absolutely terrible. Demon no bueno. I hope not, but I like the no bueno, right? He's played in Spain. I hope not, but I feel like the frustration keeps building, and it's going to get to a boiling point where many of these dudes decide to hit the road. I think that's an extreme take.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen.
I think these players committed to Kevin Young because he can develop them into NBA players. Now, does that opinion of Kevin Young change after this season because they've lost more games than they had expected? I don't think so. I still think they view Kevin Young and this coaching staff as like an NBA development staff. Is the system working in college in year one? No.
Yeah.
Right. Like I think we can acknowledge that. But I don't think that changes their opinion of Kevin and of the staff.
No, and I think if you look at each individual player, like sure they're not playing well on the court like right now, and like maybe these freshmen aren't hitting the numbers that they hit in Europe or in high school or AAU or whatever. But like you look at a guy like Richie Saunders, and like this coaching staff has already started transforming his body into like an NBA style body, and that's all due to Kevin Young and like the health and nutrition staff that they have. And that's what players are looking for. That's what AJ is looking for. Even though like it would be nice to have, a Elite Eight banner in the rafters, another one. Like the players, the recruits are looking at individual players at BYU. And I wouldn't even say that Yegor and Cannon are regressing even. Like they're playing underwhelmingly. But there's the game you've got to get used to. Like Demon's got to get used to playing Big 12 basketball in the States. Like Cannon Catchings he's still, how old is he? 18? Like he's got to get used to playing 20-year-olds. You know what I mean? Like these guys, even though they're underwhelming right now, I don't think that they're necessarily regressing. I think that they're just getting used to a different level of play, and that level of play is right now hitting us in the face, and I think it just takes time, and Kevin Young will figure it out.
Yeah, and I think if anything, if you want to kind of look at the other side of this coin, yes, they're struggling, but I think that tells you that they're not ready for the NBA. Like I don't think they would magically get drafted, go to the NBA, and be stars. Yeah, right. They may. Like I could be completely wrong, but I think if anything, like this kind of sheds light, and hopefully Yegor and Cannon can kind of acknowledge this. They are young, they're immature, they may not, but I think if they can acknowledge, like, I'm just not ready. Like, I'm not ready for the NBA, and really open up to Kevin and let Kevin kind of mold them into an NBA talent, better NBA talent, then maybe after next season, like, they're ready, right? But I don't know if Yegor, even if he gets drafted in the lottery, I just don't know if he's ready for the NBA, and there's going to be an NBA coach that has to develop him into into more of a superstar. Like I don't think that just because you're drafted as a lottery player that you're going to be a main contributor week one or whatever, month one of your rookie season.
Those are still very rare, those kinds of players. I'd be curious to know, like, if you guys remember when Kevin Young first came in, like during the summer, there was those reports of how like the players and people that were on the team were running NBA Combine style tests, right? To see where they were at. And we heard that they were running those. That's great. That's kind of where all the whole Provo thing started. Mm-hmm. But no one talked to the athletes to be like, "Oh, were you ready?" Like, I bet their numbers were like,
"Did you pass the test?"
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, I wonder how many of those athletes were like, "Oh man, I got a ways to go," which is the entire purpose of what Kevin Young's trying to do. Is like, he's not like, "Oh, it's a guaranteed way to get to the NBA." It's I know how to get players there, and I can show you where you're lacking. And I think that's what we're seeing is the lacking.
Yeah, and so going back to this whole transfer mentality, I think some players could transfer. I think a Dawson Baker could transfer. He's just not getting a lot of playing time.
Sure.
Cannon, I could maybe see only because he's coming off the bench now. I think Kevin himself has probably lost a little bit of trust in Cannon. It seems like his leash is a little bit shorter. So there could be some transfers, but I don't think those transfers are going to come because the team is struggling.
No.
I think it may come because they're not getting the playing time they wanted.
Yeah, which is what the transfer portal
That's what happens. Yeah, that's pretty typical.
It's like money or playing time.
Totally,
right?
Totally. So looking ahead this year, and granted, I kind of agree with you. I think this year is kind of just let's continue to develop players and maybe we make a run in the Big 12 tournament and it puts us on the bubble. But I think I've kind of given up. It's almost exhausting, kind of hoping for that and analyzing the whole season and thinking like, oh, they got to win this game. They got to beat Kansas. They got to beat Cincinnati.
Counting the wins and trying to get off the bubble. Yeah.
I just don't. I think that's kind of fruitless. I don't know if it's. But we can look at this week because I think there's still plenty of room for improvement. And these are the two games this week that probably give you the best opportunity to do so because then the challenge gets even harder. Mm-hmm. I think this is kind of the last of your soft schedule. Yeah. Colorado on the road. Now, BYU has struggled on the road against not great teams. Utah, TCU. Mm-hmm. Winnable games on the road, and so I'm not going to say like this should be an easy win. I've been burned in the past, last few weeks by saying that. But Colorado, they lead the conference in turnovers. That's a stat you don't want to lead a conference in. They lead the conference in fouls. They're also giving up 77 points a game while only scoring 68. They're just generally a slower paced team, and I think BYU can speed them up.
Yeah.
And turn them over. Like to be honest, the numbers point to a BYU win.
Yeah.
Now again, I don't think that's guaranteed.
Yeah.
But BYU should be able to turn them over. They should be able to score a lot. They should be able to defend them pretty well. Like I just don't. Anyway, I feel very confident about this game, similar to how I felt about Oklahoma State.
Yes, I think Oklahoma State is a great comp because, like, not saying they play the same as Colorado, but in the sense of there's a general consensus that BYU should win that game.
Yeah.
And I fully expect BYU to go to Colorado and start shooting the lights out, putting up big numbers.
Yeah.
Then it's a matter of like, oh, are we going to see another 27-point lead evaporate? Are we gonna see the 40% shooting at the stripe continue? Like, how is BYU going to beat this, for lack of a better terms, sub-optimal team, right? Like,
I mean, they're bottom of the conference,
so
at the very least, right?
You don't want to say any team's terrible, but like, how does BYU beat this terrible team? And as we saw, like Oklahoma State, that was the question I had, was like, how do we beat this terrible team? And we almost didn't. Mm-hmm. So like, I think. I agree. I think, March should be the last thing on our minds. I think we should try to see improvement on this team week by week, starting at Colorado.
Yeah. So then after Colorado, they come back home. They play Cincinnati. Cincinnati's a little bit better of a team. But still not that great. I actually think Cincinnati and BYU's records are pretty similar. Mm-hmm. But Cincinnati doesn't score well. They actually don't shoot well at all. They're a defensive team. Mm-hmm. So, they could very well be like a Houston. Sure. Now, granted, they're not going to have the same offensive production as Houston, but a Houston team that just suffocates BYU.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great test. I think that's a great test for BYU's offense because BYU's offense struggled. Let's be honest, against Houston. Mm-hmm. And so if they can show improvement from that game to this game, I think it'll look well for BYU. It at least puts them in the right direction. But again, not a great offensive team. So this could be a very low scoring game for BYU. They're only allowing 64 points a game. Mm-hmm. So if BYU can get up around 70, 75, I think they win the game. But again, I think it's a great test for BYU at home, right? So they're at home. They do well at home. Granted, they lost to Texas Tech. But I think they should win pretty comfortably against Cincinnati as well because they're at home.
Yeah. One thing I like to do, and I did this for football this year, is you break down all aspects of the game or whatever and things you want to see, and then you take a large step back and you look at one thing that you would like to see your team improve on.
Yeah.
Against so-and-so team, right? And so, like, if we do that here, I think this will help us to see if there's any improvement on the team. So, Tuesday or whenever we play Colorado, let's look at, okay, maybe BYU maintains a healthy lead throughout the entire game, shoots better at the free throw line, okay? And then Saturday against Cincinnati, let's see if they can score more points in the paint, because Cincinnati's going to try to muck it up, try to defend the basket down low. I think if BYU can do that, then that's another sign of improvement.
Cincinnati actually defends the three really well. I mean, that's their specialty is they defend you off the line.
Interesting.
So can you take advantage of that and get it inside? Like you said, like can they score inside?
Because I would like to see good defense and good scoring from our bigs, which I feel like has been lesser as of late.
Yeah. All right. We're gonna talk a little bit of football now. Yes, it is early, but it's Athlon's early preseason rankings, and BYU comes in at a pretty interesting number. We'll talk about it coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans, the Loyal Cougars Podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars Podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with Cougar Faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. All right, shifting gears real quick to football. We'll just spend a little bit of time because I think these preseason rankings, especially in January of the year prior to the season, are pretty worthless. But Athlon comes out with their early preseason rankings about this time of year every year, and BYU comes in at number 16. I don't hate it. I think it's acceptable. I think you can't really factor much into these rankings other than who comes back and where do they rank at the end of the season. And so they don't lose a whole lot of talent, which is great. I think it's honestly, I think one of the best things that can happen to a college football team is that their starting quarterback comes back. Now, granted, Jake gets a lot of heat, and I think a lot of it's, some of it's deserved. I think he doesn't deserve a lot of it, but I think bringing Jake back, giving him he now has a full year under his belt. I think he's if he can take a step forward, this team is a top 15 team. And then again, they don't lose a lot of receivers. Who do they lose at receiver? Roberts is back. I think did Lassiter announce he's back?
I don't think he's announced yet, but word on the street is
it sounds like he's coming back.
He's coming back.
And so, you don't lose a lot of talent at receiver, if any. LJ Martin's back. I'm trying to think, like, they lose some talent at offensive line, but
the O-line, at least on the offensive side, you lose offensive line guys. Well, I mean, could
like Connor
come back? Well, Connor's gone. Yeah, Connor can't come back. But like Caleb Etienne, he did play JUCO, so if possible, he could come back.
Yeah,
but who knows?
And then defensively, like, they're stacked. Like their linebackers are stacked. I think their secondary stacked. I think the biggest question is defensive line.
Yeah.
As far as depth, I do think they bring in talent at defensive line, but maybe there is some depth issues. But defensively, they're not. I don't think they're going to be much worse than last year, if not better. So, top 15 seems reasonable. Bussin on Cougar board. Bussin is the name of the poster. These names, man. It says, I legitimately think we're a top 10 team next year, but even at 16, this gives us the ability to move up fairly quickly if we take care of business. And I agree. I think part of it's kind of interesting because, a team like an Alabama, where they finish with a not so great record compared to past Alabama years, and yet they still get ranked high because they're Alabama, but because of where they ranked preseason, right?
Yeah.
It's even though preseason rankings don't mean a whole lot, they mean something when it comes later in the season, and if, for example, like a Boise State, right?
Yeah.
Not ranked super high to begin the season, and they had to kind of claw their way up.
I think you hit it right on. I think the only purpose that like the preseason AP poll, whenever it comes out, right? The only purpose it serves is to rank the teams in the preseason regular season for that year as a base for that team to build upon, right?
Yeah.
So I'm saying like, BYU, if they come in top 15, great. If you play Stanford, even though Stanford's sorry, like that's a pretty attractive team. Big 12 ACC, one of them's ranked, right? And so that's the only purpose that it really serves. And at the end of the season last year, I was like, all I want to see is BYU ranked in the top 25. I think they deserve top 15.
Yeah.
But as long as BYU is ranked in the top 25, awesome, because that's how you build upon it. We have another good, successful season in 2025. Then that rolls over to the next year, and that's how it gets started.
Yeah. And I'll put it this way. If BYU goes undefeated, it's a lot easier to make now granted it's a 12-team playoff now, but it would be a lot easier to make a playoff if you started ranked in the top 25 than if you didn't, right? Like that's simply put, that's kind of the benefit of being ranked preseason. Other than that, it's pretty worthless, especially from an Athlon article in January. But it is fun to talk about still. And they here's what they say in their article. They say after an 11-win season, the next step for BYU under coach Kalani Sitake is to reach the Big 12 championship game in 2025. And with the bulk of the key contributors returning, a Big 12 title is a realistic goal for the Cougars. And I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. They talks about players they bring back. But here's what I think is actually probably most important is the schedule. Yes. And they say in a scheduling quirk, BYU will not play Kansas State, Arizona State, or Baylor next season, which I think is huge. Now, they do play Utah. They do play Utah at home.
Yes.
And I think Utah's not going to be down again. I think you're not going to see Utah down twice in a row.
Right.
Non-conference, Portland State, Stanford, East Carolina, all winnable games like you mentioned. TCU, UCF, Utah, West Virginia at home, Arizona, Cincinnati, Colorado, Iowa State, Texas Tech on the road. I think Colorado's not going to be the same as they were this year. I think Arizona will probably be better than they were this year. That might be their toughest road game. Cincinnati. Oh, Iowa State. Iowa State. Iowa State's going to be the toughest on the road.
Texas Tech's not too bad either.
Texas Tech's good, yes. Yeah. So road games are generally going to be tough anyway, right? Yeah. So, but again, I think this is a favorable schedule, especially considering what we thought of this year's schedule going in. Granted, it didn't really play out the way we thought. I think some of the teams we thought would be good, like Oklahoma State and Utah, were not. And then the other side around, the flip side with Arizona State being good. But it's a favorable schedule, and I think having an early preseason ranking and then having a favorable schedule, it's a perfect combination to maybe week 10 next year, BYU being ranked potentially in the top 10.
The roadmap is simpler, right, this time around. And all BYU has to do, just like we had to do this past season, is win, and you're in. And so the goal for Kalani gets simpler, I think, this season, especially with so much people coming back. So, yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited.
We could look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or so games in before BYU even loses. Granted, I didn't pull this in chronological. I just pulled home and road. But they should win their first 3, and I think if they win their first 3, they're easily in the top 15. Yeah. And then they just climb from there. Hopefully.
I think the schedule is supposed to come out end of January or something, right? Or something like that.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We can count the wins then. But just looking at the names on the list, it's really favorable. Yeah. And if BYU comes out top 15 in the preseason polls, even better. It's going to be great.
All right, it already feels uncomfortable talking about BYU football in January, so we'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening to the Loyal Cougars Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, joined by Hema Heimuli, X_Hems on X. I need to change my social media handles everywhere. I'm still Jake KUTV.
Oh yeah.
I thought about it this morning. This is a stupid story. I don't even know why I'm sharing. Why am I sharing this story? I was like, I should do what Hema does and put an X in front of my last name and shorten my last name. But then I was like, no, that would be XEd. And I don't want that. So I'm not going to do that. But I do need to come up with a new Twitter handle. And so, or X handle, whatever the heck you call it nowadays.
Yeah.
So maybe you can help me, or if you're listening, please
send us.
Please tag me. I need
This is
better.
gonna be great.
I need better ideas. So tag me. For now, it's at Jake KUTV until I have a good suggestion sent my way. So please save me and give me a good social media handle. That would be very much appreciated. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to our podcast on all of the major podcast channels, and probably not major as well. Who knows? And follow us on our social media channels. That would be very greatly appreciated. Again, I'm Jake Edmonds. That's Hema Heimuli. This is the Loyal Cougars Podcast. We'll see you next time.